Hi, everybody, and thank you all for joining us today. We had a bit of a technical delay, but if you're still here with us, thank you for staying on board. My name is Susan Jama, and I'm the Programs and the Community Coordinator here at Onsite Gallery. Today's joining us is Emmanuel, Kwasi, Peter, as well as our wonderful ASL interpreters, Christina and Shelby, who will be interpreting throughout the panel today. Today's panel, it is titled Reimagining Through Art. And I would like to begin with a land acknowledgement. Onsite Gallery at OCAD University is situated in Tech Toronto, Toronto Island. Sorry, Toronto Island. Sorry, Turtle Island. Onsite Gallery and OCAD University acknowledges the ancestral territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishpac, and the Wendat, who are the original owners and custodians of the land on which we stand, work, and create in. We also acknowledge all treaty peoples, including those who came here as settlers, as migrants in this generation or in generations past, and those of us who came here involuntarily as a result of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. We pay tribute to those ancestors of African origin and descent. I would like to acknowledge our exhibition funders and supporters. Onsite Gallery is generously supported by the Delaney family. Our current exhibition, Becoming in the Light of the Miracle, is generously supported by the Ontario Arts Council, an agency of the Government of Ontario through the Curatorial Projects, Indigenous and Cultural Diverse Program. So today's panel brings together researchers, artists, and technologists whose practices explore the transformative work of reimagining, rethinking, and remaking history. Through a range of mediums, including technology, painting, textiles, or fashion, and social inquiry, our panelists engage in acts of reconstruction, reviving cultural and artistic lineages, examining collective socioeconomic ecosystems, and imagining new pathways for how stories and knowledge move forward. Their work challenges dominant narratives and invites us to reflect on whose histories are told, whose knowledge is upheld, and how the past can be reclaimed, repaired, and expanded. By centering lived experience, ancestral knowledge, and community memory, their practices open space for alternative ways of understanding both the past and the futures we're collectively shaping. In the spirit of the exhibition that is currently on display at Onsite Gallery, Becoming in the Light of the Miracle, which encourages us to think about emergent systems, collective behaviors, and the forces that engage awareness. Today's conversation invites us to consider how art, technology, and community intersect in imagining or reimagining new possibilities. The structure for today's event is as follows. I will introduce each panelist. Each panelist in turn will present for 10 minutes or so. We will then move into a moderated Q&A session. Towards the final 20 minutes of the event, we will open the virtual floor to our online audience, you who are joining us today from your location. And during the panel discussion, please feel free to drop your questions in our YouTube channel room. which we will take the time to answer in the last 20 minutes of today's panel. So I would like to introduce Peter. Peter, BFA, Masters of Design, is a lecturer at OCAD University. His background includes executive education training at MIT, Sloan School, Entrepreneurship Program, Wharton School of Business, and said Social Entrepreneurship Program, and the University of Toronto Rotman School. He is a co-founder of a social enterprise that provides entrepreneur skills training for individuals and communities. Peter's research areas include creative entrepreneurship, social finance, social innovation, and movement through dance concepts. He is currently exploring alternative ways of teaching and learning in a workshop titled Walk, Talk, and Tea as a way of reconnecting with regenerating knowledge practices to bring into the classroom space. Questions that help guide Peter's values and creative business practices are how we might tell stories with our bodies, our voices, and pause for fulfillment or purpose. What rhythm might we follow when we walk, talk, and drink tea or whiskey? And I will now open the floor and invite Peter to join us and do his fantastic presentation. Oh, Peter, you're on mute, by the way.
Okay, so well, thank you very much, Suzanne. I'm delighted to be here today, and I just want to make sure that you can hear me and that you can see my screen. So I'm going to share my screen with you right now, and we can get going. Okay. Okay, so you can probably see my slides, which is my first slides. I've got a couple of slides I'd like to share, and as I will talk along the way. My title for my talk today is Futures from Diverse Perspectives, Afrofuturism, Can Futures Be Decolonized? And what you're looking at is the symbols that you're looking at are African Adinkra symbols from West Africa. These are ancient symbols that have a lot of philosophical meanings and values behind them. You may have heard of, for example, the Sankofa. You may have heard of that word. Sankofa also have its symbols, which is looking backwards, but also looking forward. And so it's one of the many symbols from African history that I'm pushing off from. This is the images. I've actually drew these images myself. And it was a way for me to connect back with my past and reflect on my ancestors as a way of remembering where I came from, where I come from. So today, as I was saying, I would like to talk about futures, Afrofuturism as a vehicle to talk about the future of African people in the diaspora and globally. And I have a couple of slides, as I was saying, and just a little bit about my background, just so you have a little bit of context. I can probably best be described in three buckets with art, business, and design, contemporary modern dance background, business entrepreneurship, and design. And here's that piece that I drew a couple of years back. And here's a couple of dance pictures of me in my past, contemporary modern dance. I'm a co-founder of a social enterprise called Generation Connection. You can see the connection there. I'm trying to connect to the past, acknowledge the future, and acknowledge the present and look for the future. towards the future. I also do some private consultancy under continuum design education, in addition to teaching here at OCAD University. So hopefully that gives you a sense of where I'm coming from. So the title, again, this idea of can futures be decolonized? And th this idea came, I'm wondering, you might be wondering why this came up. And I will just push off from this quote that I learned a couple of years back. It says, the experience of of being Black in America has, for the beginning of time, involved engagement and alienation, or sorry, estrangement and alienation. And so this quote really struck me because Jury at the time was saying, being Black in America is like a science fiction experience in that African people in America, they were actual aliens in their own country. And that really struck me as to explore. And I started to dig a lot of sort of do a lot more research into that. And I was looking at music in particular. I was looking at Coltrane. I was looking at um, Miles Davis. I was looking at Herbie Hancock, and in particular, I was looking at Sun Ra. And so these were giants in the sort of canon of jazz music, the jazz music pantheon, the history of jazz. And they were exploring a particular theme. They were exploring a particular theme around escape. I see a clear pattern of escape in the music that they were exploring. This idea of space and exploration of space and escape. These themes were coming up quite a bit in terms of the music that they were talking about, the theme that they were talking about through the music. And that really fascinated me. And I think what was going on, if you look at some of the albums between 1960s to 1975 or so, the themes that they were exploring was quite extraordinary in how they were looking at how African people, not only were they aliens, but they were actually looking to reclaim that alienation and actually possibly look at themselves in the future, possibly leave America. There was a movement to sort of go back to the motherland, for example, the mothership, for example. And so I was exploring all of that theme altogether. And so Afrofuturism born from all of that. And so, me teaching here at OCAD University, I was exploring research in design thinking, which is a methodology that I also use, and this idea of futuristic practice, foresight practice and futurist practice. And there's a connection there with how we think about the future. And so that's what got me thinking, how might we redesign the future? How might Black folks exist in the future? So I was speculating about, say, 2050, for example. What would Black folks look like economically and socially by mid-century 2050? So those were some of the ideas I was thinking about. So now you can see, if you come across a quote like this is by a well-known futurist in the practice of foresight today and futurist practice. His name is Jim Dater, and he was quoted by another person. And he basically said, the future is not neutral, but rather it's colonized. And the future studies, in effect, is a vehicle through which the future can be decolonized, in which dominant images can be challenged and alternative images can be created. And this really got me going again in terms of thinking about how might we redefine the future through images, how might we redefine the future through ideas, through stories, through music, through art, through literature, all of the things that Black folks do. I was thinking about that on a regular basis. I think and the idea of practice of design thinking, or the practice of um, design thinking, and even just being a musician, for example, allows artists to actually use design and the creative process to actually redefine the future. And so me being an artist, that really resonated with me as to how might we redefine the future. Now, I want to just take us a step back again and invite you to think about if our future is colonized, can the future or futures be decolonized? And that's something, a question that I will invite you to think about. And I'd love to hear what you have to say afterwards. And how might we do that? How might we decolonize the future? So, yeah. And so, another step further back, this idea of colonialism is an important thing to reflect on. What is colonialism, right? I think that we intuitively know what that is, but formally, colonialism is a very, very barbaric history. And it includes genocide of indigenous people. It includes, the enslavement of African people. It includes the monopolization of political power, and so forth. And so that's an important thing to also reflect on, and which is what I'm responding to as well as a person who's teaching and thinking about how the future might be decolonized. And then again, I also just want to bring your attention to what is foresight practice. Foresight practice, it's a discipline in education today, in disciplines today. A lot of businesses are more and more using foresight practices. So, for example, you may have heard of Shell Company, the oil and gas company. They started to use foresight practice 50 years ago, and they've thought about the future, and so that they can continue to be profitable in the future, in terms of extracting of oil and gas revenue and so on. So it's a very powerful method and thought leadership type of practice, if you will. Um, but again, just bringing back again, because I'm talking about Afrofuturism, another definition, Afrofuturism is a literary and cultural aesthetic, and combines elements of science fiction, historical fiction, fantasy, Afrocentrism, magic realism and non-Western cosmologies in order to critique. That's an important word, critique, and not only the present day dilemmas of people of color, but also to revise and interrogate and re-examine the historical events of the past, right? And so Afrofuturism is a confluence of different types of practice, science, technology, art, and so forth. And one equation that we can think about in terms of Afrofuturism is it's storytelling. It equals to storytelling. It's plus art, culture, mixture of militancy, tradition, pride, mind bending. Many of you have experienced art, and really good art moves us. Really good art changes us in many ways, and yeah. So if you remember when you hear a really good song, for example, you are compelled to move, because the song is so good, and or the work is so good. So yeah, so the power of art and design is a really, really important vehicle, in terms of redefining and shaping the future. And so that's what I've leaned into it with regards to Afrofuturism, understanding what is Afrofuturism, how might I redefine the future. And yeah, so I come back to the question again, if our future is colonized, can the future or futures be decolonized? And how might that happen? And so we can indeed reimagine how the future is. And Afrofuturism's attempts to do that, attempts to take the ugliness of what African people are often described about and actually shift it into a new gear, reclaim it and shift it into a new gear. So one of the things that I want to do now is to talk about what I've done in my practice, and to give you a sense of how that looks on a practical level. So I designed a card game, and the card game is called 2050 Black Swan. It's a social speculative card game, and that's the main title is 2050 Black Swan, but the functioning title is called Hacking Black Futures Social Economy Card Game. And so it's a card game that really just, it's a social card game, and I'm hoping to give you a flavor of what that is in a moment. so that you can get a sense of what I'm talking about. The idea of black swan, if you will, is it's considered an anomaly, something that happens. Often you don't really know why it happens. It just emerges. And so I was playing with that particular concept of something emerging, don't know, a phenomenal emerge, but you don't know what happened. And so I thought that that would be a useful way of speculating about the future. Something will emerge, something has emerged. And so what I was doing with this particular card game was I was looking at how might we collectively redefine and improve Black economic futures through social movement, through social business, mission, visions, and values. So if you look back at Black folks, there's an enormous amount of examples of Black values existing historically, even contemporary. And so my research took me into capturing some of those values of the past and trying to acknowledge them in the future and then speculate about them acknowledge them in the present and speculate about them in the future. So that's what I was doing with the basic structure of a methodology that's called the three horizons, which is a method in foresight practice. Um, I teach here at OCAD University in a program that's called Strategic Foresight and Innovation. And part of that program, there's a method that's called the three horizons. And so what I've done, I've taken that method and used it as a theoretical framework for my card game. So that's the crux of the card game in a sense. So now I'm going to show you some cards that actually exist in the card game and give you a flavor of how it works, and then give you an example of how I've used the card game to potentially think about the future, to potentially redefine the future for Black folks. So, so what you're looking at is the framework of or the horizons that I've set up. And in any horizons, there's always there's three specific horizons, and then there's a fourth horizon that is basically an ace of spade card. And I've speculated that there are potentially on the horizon, there are three different types of economic systems that will emerge. One of them is called the Horizon Red Hot Trumped Out Capitalism, and that's the red card. That's a future scenario that I'm speculating about 2050. The second horizon is the blue ocean, which is a concept called blue ocean strategy. I've taken that and speculated about that in the future, there will be a social economy, social innovation, social economy. And then another third horizon is this idea of steady state economy, which is an actual concept called economic concept called steady state economy. So up and down, steady along. And then I also speculate that this anomaly, this anomaly, this black swan might emerge, and that this, like any card game, there's a ace of spade, and so my ace of spade is black swan. That in the future you'll have Black folks potentially emerging in a way that is prosperous, and that they can use this particular card to actually transform themselves in the future. So yeah, that's the gist of the game. Now, I'm going to show you an example of how what I've done to sort of use the card game as a way of speculating about the future. So what you're looking at here is this particular card game that speculated about a person by the name of Viola Desmond. Viola Desmond is the story of Viola Desmond is that she was Nova Scotia in 1940. She an affluent Black woman, parked her car in a garage to get it fixed and decided to kill some time in the theater. And so she went to the theater and she was dragged out and arrested and allegedly that she did not pay her money to sit in the seat that she sat. She sat in the orchestra area. And in those days, segregation was still alive in Canada in 1940. And so she was arrested, and that story got buried in Canada. And so it's an example of what my card game has done. It has really taken that story and put it in a social card game as a way of reappreciating that particular incident and that particular values that Viola Desmond stood for, and that our country seems to be wanting to stand for as well. And so when I created this particular card game, I did not know that Viola Desmond was going to end up on our $10 bill. So my card game was created in 2015, 2016. And then a year after or so, she was on the $10 bill. So I guess I bring all of that to say that when we speculate about the future, we can think about the future and actually bring it into reality in the things we do and the way we do what we do. The intention behind this card game is to do just that, to socialize changes and bring changes into reality. And so that's what I was trying to do. And so you can imagine the shock that I experienced when well, not shock, but surprised to say the least, when I saw that she was on a $10 bill, and I had no idea. Trudeau did not say, Peter Scott, she's going to be on a $10 bill. And it just happened. And then, so yeah, so all of that to say, a card game, can be a useful tool to a vessel to design new ways of being into the world. I think it's an example of how we bring art and design with economic systems that exist today in our world that can be harsh conditions such as Trumpism, for example. And I think that I hope that you can see the use of art and design as a way of grappling with some of these challenges and exploring different ways of doing things, and hopefully provide solutions that we can all benefit from. Some references from that I've been using over the years for this particular venture. And I think I'll stop there and hand it back over to you, Suzanne.
Thank you, Peter. And I really enjoyed listening to the card game and how you incorporated history and design together. And I think we'll definitely need to circle back on that a little bit more. Thank you, Peter.
Mm.
Next is Kwasi, sorry. Kwasi is a Toronto-based creative technologist, touch designer developer, and creative coder. A house tenant and house labs facilitator, Kwasi conducts educational workshops based on digital design philosophy and immersive experience. He works with multiple mediums and form factors, which has presented him with many opportunities to assist and consult in productions, ranging from interactive installation and app development to education, film, and wearable technology. Kwasi is currently bridging his disciplines for future work. So, Kwasi, I'm going to pass off the floor to you.
Thank you, Susan. Can everybody hear me all right? Great. I'm just going to share my screen here. Okay, so I'm going to let this play as I talk. It's not a full slideshow presentation, but it's just a series of different projects that I've been a part of. Okay, so hello, my name is Kwasi Bugyei, and I am a creative technologist and artist, which means that I am somebody that deals with technology, usually builds it, programs tech, or has some sort of knowledge base around tech, but under the more creative lens. So, let's pull out my notes. Creative lens, and more so in the creative disciplines. So for me, I incorporate my artistic disciplines with my technological background to create new experiences for both the tech sector and the art sector. I started out as an installation artist originally, working with installations, working in installations. I built this one installation that was a fashion show on a streetcar. Um, uh, that was one of my first installations that I freely commissioned to myself to install, as well as being creative director for the entire team. That would grant me the chance to work with the XO team at House with Lamar Taylor. And it was also co-founded by Abel Tesfaye, also known as The Weeknd. The other and other affiliates in Toronto arts and business sector as well. So for me personally, I've always had a deep technological background, or at least a deep interest in technology and how technology plays into my artistic discipline. My favorite artist is also one of my favorite scientists, Da Vinci. So I really adhere to the blending and melding of those two disciplines to create better versions of both, whether it's design or technology. Sorry, design for technology, or whether it's technology to create better art. During the pandemic of 2020, I was no longer able to conduct installations that brought people together the way I used to. So what I had to do was figure out a pivot. And I was already learning touch designer at the time. And basically the pandemic gave me extra time to focus on and harden my skills. And that's exactly what I did. For me, the need to consistently continue creating within the tech sector boils down to a couple core concepts and tenets of mine. One being earthwork. While when you look at the actual components of modern technology, the chip processors, the motherboards, everything that goes into it, a host of rare earth materials and elements are embedded in those systems. So for me, dealing with technology, I always I felt like it was a way for me to connect with the motherland, connecting with the continent that birthed humanity, essentially. In a way, I view it more as me interacting and interfacing with African gems and trying to empower more African hands and minds with the earth that produced these technologies in the first place. So for me, it's very much an extension of earthwork. And whenever I build technology, the second part of my core philosophy is to deal with access and inclusion, especially with especially with technology, and Black Americans and Africans. We make up less than 10% of the entire tech workforce. So when you have designs and technologies that are going to impact Black and African lives, not designed by Black people, we get digital prejudice. We get basically digital racism and exclusion. And that is actually something that I've experienced as far as my own childhood, dealing with sensors that did not pick up melanated individuals and therefore would close on me when I was a child, or a child trying to walk through them, or understanding that whenever you're using photography equipment or photography programming, the way the lighting is not designed to capture dark features, and the extra settings you have to go through to when you're dealing with technology that wasn't designed for individuals like you. But individuals like you were never part of the consulting process. So I feel like I felt like for me, being in technology, in the technological field, being able to interface with these technologies and being able to build these technologies allows me to remedy that, at least influence the design and the creations of some of these projects. Because without our participation, we're going to be left out of these systems, and we're going to be, these systems are going to be so superfluous and so prolific that they will affect us even if we didn't ask them to, even if we don't recognize it. And that, I believe, is a big problem within the technological sector. And it's one that I feel has a design and a participation-based solution. So I have now built All Creative, which is my company. I'm looking to build other organizations to primarily empower the minds and hands of people that I feel have the world's solutions. And that would be the young people of the emerging African continent. I do genuinely believe that the African problem set yields the world's solutions. And my work hopefully can empower those to view themselves as part of the solution and view themselves as leaders and influencers of technology and not just victims of it, not just people that have to deal with it, but people that can build it, change it, alter it if need be. The slideshow in the background are just a couple of the visual aids of that's encapsulating basically my range of things that I've done, but I truly feel like I've just gotten started, whether it's Matipso, Kenya, or intimate moments in Toronto where I'm teaching touch designer to new and aspiring minds. I aim to push for that broader conversation to be had about the way we build and why we are building. Thank you.
Thank you, Kwasi. As you were presenting, I just literally wrote another question that I will ask you in the moderation component because I am really interested in how you've intersected art, fashion, and technology in the work that you are currently doing. So it'd be really fascinating to hear more about it in the moderation component. But I will now take the time to introduce Emmanuel. Emmanuel is an artist currently based in Toronto. He is an assistant professor of studio art at the University of Toronto. His practice engages with beauty as a necessity for survival and a precursor to thriving. Through a rigorous, playful inquiry into materials and image-making processes, his works depict garden spaces as complicated sanctuaries within which manifestations of beauty and care are present. His work has been presented in multiple solo and group exhibitions across Canada and internationally and can be found in the collections of Art Gallery of Ontario, Art Gallery of Guelph, Art Gallery of Alberta, Art Bank of Canada, and the National Gallery of Canada. The virtual floor is yours, Emmanuel.
Thank you very much, Susan. I will share, but I will also just say that I'm deep into a cold, so apologies if I need to take a break to drink some water and breathe. Just confirming if you're able to see my presentation. I can't see you, so a visual cue would, or an audio cue would be helpful. Yeah, thank you. So I would like to introduce my work by using this Hilton Als quote that I came across in an essay a few years ago. This quote is significant to me because the questions asked here succinctly encapsulate the underlying concerns of my research and practice. And so I'll give you all a second to read it. So for me, the thing about flowers and thus the garden is their ability to invoke a recognition or a memory of beauty and the attached human sentiment towards beauty. Um, this recognition and engagement with the beautiful, for me, acts as a critical tool for imagining and participating in the sustaining of life for the marginalized body, specifically in the context of the many traumas, because on the one hand, it recognizes and gives form to what is inherent, while simultaneously pointing towards future possibilities. So this graphic is a graphic that was shared with me by a friend at the start of the COVID pandemic. And I return to it a lot in the context of thinking through the necessity for a sustained engagement with beauty. I'm drawn to this graphic because it gives language that can help one to identify where they may be while simultaneously pointing to a certain level of fluidity between states. It implies the possibility of movement between zones, implying that one is not stuck or fixed in a particular zone. What it does not do, however, is give guidance as to how one can move from one state to another, which begs the question, how does one move from being in crisis to struggling to surviving and then to thriving? For my interests, potentially a sustained engagement with the highly subjective and fluid category of the beautiful is a potential tool for this movement. This theoretical framework owes a significant debt to the writing of Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, who's a marine biologist and climate activist, who described a recent project in which she asked participants to tell her with as much detail as possible where they thought the world was headed with regards to the climate emergency. In response, people were able to paint very vivid pictures of the dystopic world we would exist in if we are unable to correct course. She then asked them to describe the world we would exist in if we were to correct course with a similar degree of detail. Her question was, what would the world look like if we get things right? To her surprise, people were unable to describe in any degree of detail what this possibly good future would look like. This poses a challenge then. How are we to move towards the possibility of a good future that we cannot even imagine or picture? Isn't it more likely that we will move more closely to that which we picture with more detail? And so then, what is the role of the imagination? What is the role of fiction? What is the role of creativity in being able to give glimpses or ideate this possibly good future? Additionally, the situation of beauty as a critical necessity in the process of imagining futurity and precisely a possibly good future owes a debt to the writing of the American poet Ross Gay. I had the privilege of reading Ross Gay's book of Delights in 2020, and in this book, he makes a phenomenal case for the cultivation of one's attention towards things of beauty, or, in his words, delight. Outlining the premise for the collection of essays, Ross Gay says, and I'll quote him, he says, "One day last July, feeling delighted and compelled to both wonder about and share that delight, I decided that it might feel nice, even useful, to write a daily essay about something delightful. I remember laughing to myself for how obvious this was. I could call it something like the Book of Delights. I came up with a handful of rules. Write a delight every day for a year, begin and end of my birthday, August 1st. Draft them quickly and write them by hand. The rules made it a discipline, a practice. Spend time thinking and writing about delight every day. Because I was writing these essayettes pretty much daily, confession, I skipped some days, patterns and themes and concerns show up. For instance, I traveled quite a bit this year. I often wrote in cafes, my mother is often on my mind, racism is often on my mind, kindness is often on my mind, politics, pop music, books, dreams, public space. My garden is often on my mind. It didn't take me long to learn that the discipline or practice of writing these essays occasioned a kind of delight radar, or maybe it was more like the development of a delight muscle, something that implies that the more you study delight, the more delight there is to study. A month or two into this project, delights were calling to me, write about me, write about me. Because it is rude to not acknowledge your delights, I tell them that though they might not become SAS, they were still important, and I was grateful to them. Which is to say, I felt my life to be more full of delight, not without sorrow or fear or pain or loss, but more full of delight. I also learned that my delight grows, much like love and joy, when I share it. So the crucial line for me here, in thinking about my work and what I'm trying to do, is this notion of developing a delight radar, um, a radar that makes one's life more full of delight, not without sorrow or fear or pain or loss, um, and not ignorant of injustice, but simply more full of something specific, and in this case, delight. In my work, the garden becomes a useful metaphor for thinking through the notion of the work that is needed to cultivate a space of care that emerges through intentional acts of caring labor, and conversely serves as a space of possible reciprocity. This space of possibility can hold an individual or a community, but critically remains fictitious, acting as a sort of propellant towards a potential real, not a romantic ideal. Formally, my work asks, how can one transform the space of the studio into a garden? And how can the material processes embedded within one's studio practice echo the material processes inherent in the creation of a garden in order to therefore extend a garden experience to one's community? The process of collage becomes significant for me in this respect. I use the process of collage to mimic the experience of moving through the space of a garden. The collages reflect this dynamic spatial organization present in gardens and the oscillation of attention experienced in gardens. Collage also offers this notion of dynamic possibility, where things don't have to function in a predetermined or even logical way, but a multiplicity of perspectives can collide without resolution in order to create a productive tension. To create these collages, I printed my entire archive of cell phone garden photographs of other people's gardens, and treating them like seedlings in a way, submerged them in water to dislodge the ink deposits that were made by the printer. And then I ripped them apart by hand and reconfigured them to create compositions that allowed for the coexistence of multiple perspectives and complex color and formal relationships. So that the collages then began to provide for me a roadmap for complex articulations of space that resulted or that reconstituted the photographic snapshot into large-scale immersive paintings that function as an extension of this invitation of a garden experience to both myself and the community. Um, So these spaces become spaces in which a viewer can simultaneously reflect on absence and also project a possible presence. And so I'll use this time to just talk a little bit about a recent project that was at the Power Plant Contemporary Art Gallery that really brought together this notion of fictitious spaces created from the lens of from through the practice of collage, resulting into um, resulting in imagined fictitious spaces that are depicted through paintings that seem real. And in the exhibition at the power plant, the focus here was actually to try to convert the garden or convert the gallery into a fictitious garden space. The title of the exhibition was To Dream of Other Places, and really thinking about this notion of using elements of the real, using elements of the past, using elements of the concrete to imagine future possibilities. And so the gallery space became this open communal space that could be inhabited by anybody, Um, and it served as the sort of macro view into a garden experience that also had within it these micro possibilities. Um, there were these fountains for me that really recall the experience of being in natural spaces and choosing not to actually um, prioritize a visual experience, but to think about the multi-sensory component of existing in a space, which can include sound. Um, and the birds for me then kind of speak to this notion again of possibility, to have these birds that are, on the one hand, uh, concrete and physically material and allude to the possibility of flights, and then actually have to rely on the viewer's uh, capacity for suspending their disbelief. So you see one thing that tells you that it exists only in a fixed state, but it creates the condition for you to imagine that it might exist in an other state. So I will stop there.
Thank you, Emmanuel, for presenting the presentation. I really liked the little birds that were sitting on the small blue tiles. It's kind of like um, seeing, the birds in real life sitting on top of water. Like that's how it's kind of like building another worldview, but in a different space.
Mm.
Awesome. So we'll go into the moderation component of the panel. I think what I'll do is I did have questions beforehand drafted but because of the presentations that I just heard made me think a little bit more differently, so I might go off script slightly. So to start with you, Peter, I wanted to ask you a question about how did the idea of like integrating the historical events or figures, in this case, Viola Desmond, right, come into play with the card game that you have designed and created and that you spoke about?
Yeah, thank you, Suzanne, for that. Uh, so it came about from really teaching. Like, I mean, when we think about systems like economic systems and education systems, as a teacher, when you're in the classroom, you're trying to find alternative ways of teaching and learning.
Mhm.
And for me, the card game represents a response to alternative ways of teaching and learning in our current time today, in that it's a tool that it's tactile, it's analog, and students can look at it and move it around and actually read something. Their eyeballs are looking at the card as opposed to at the screen. And so those types of ways of thinking of alternative ways of teaching and learning is something that interests me from a pedagogical perspective. And just really just messing with the classroom, to be honest with you, messing with that Pursue Me March classroom where one person is up front and 40 people is in front of you and they're listening to you. I wanted it to be much more dynamic and social. So the card game allows that opportunity to really be tactile and social sharing of knowledge and that type of interaction. So that's one way that I would describe it, that it came into being. Yeah.
Does it become like a competitive sport? Like, for those of us who play Uno, it becomes a bit wild. But in this instance, because there's a little bit more history and depth to it, does it become like
Mhm.
that in the classroom setting when the card game is on?
Yeah, I've tried this card game a couple of times in different settings, and I'm still iterating it. And the purpose behind it is to look at the past, the values of the past. And this particular card game has, it's got people in like Martin Luther King, um, Nelson Mandela. It's got scenarios like with called an organization called Crew TV that exists up in Markham. In 15 years ago, they were training young people in digital literacy, and the idea was to speculate that that if these young folks continue, Black youth continue to learn digital literacy, what would they be like in the future? They would be literate people that are like probably like Kwasi, where they're sort of using the technology, 21st century technology, to create new lives, alternative lives that is prosperous, economically prosperous. And so I
Mhm.
was speculating about that, and I thought that in the classroom, transfer of knowledge, oral transfer of knowledge was what I was interested in playing with, especially value systems and ways that have been forgotten, such as the Viola Desmond story or Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. when he talked about a new vision for Black folks in America. You know,
Mhm.
that was a dream and that was a reality. And so felt that if I could capture that narrative and then look at what it's like in our current world, the present world today, by looking back, sanko for it, look at back, see what it's like today, and acknowledge why it has not occurred, or has it occurred? And if it has not occurred, what might we do for the future to make sure that it is occurring?
Mm. Okay. And then for the future one, the one I think you've mentioned 2050, does that speak to the future in a different way, I guess?
Yeah, it does in that. So, for example, the cards that I mentioned with the scenarios, we've got trumped out capitalism, for example. That was intentional because at the time that I created the card game, Trump, Trumpism was rising, and
Mm-hmm.
I see that as a foresight practitioner. I saw that as a weak early signal of what the future could be.
Hmm.
And lo and behold, we are currently living in a red hot sun, trumped out capitalism time where the economic conditions are scorching hot, and they could burn you. They could burn a lot of people who are less fortunate. And you see all of the repercussions in our world today when you
Hmm.
have a very, very crudely economic system that is behaving in a very arrogant way, if you will.
Hmm.
Uh, when we talk about trickle-down economics, nothing is trickling down, you know. And so the idea is to interrogate these systems, to when you put them on a piece of paper and ask people to think about them, ask students to think about them, is to acknowledge what's going on and to actually sit with those scenarios and contemplate what they might be in the future if they blossom.
Hmm.
And so that's what I was thinking about. And so the other scenario was the social economy and steady state economy scenario. And again, is providing alternative ways of looking at the futures. So, yeah.
Cool. Cool, cool, cool. And then I have a question for you, Kwasi. I am curious to learn about your journey in terms of how you've intersected or merged your creative lens or creative side to your technologist side. How did that come to be? Was it something that you've always wanted to do, or did one side come after the other, or did it merge at some point together?
Uh, I have always had a deep technological side to me, but so my father was a professor of pharmacology at the University of Ghana. Um, so within my household, it was always respect for the sciences was always there. I share the same name as him, so I thought I was going to be a surgeon. I thought I was going to be some sort of medical professional growing up. So I always kept this idea of the sciences, championing the sciences within myself. And I thought that was my path initially going through school. What happened would be that in around grade 7, grade 8, I started to exhibit signs of like a higher acumen to creativity. I had many different teachers tell me I was always kind of the person that has they do the art class and their the pictures will be up on the wall type of thing, like they
Mhm.
selecting me for that. So I noticed that there was these two sides of myself that were actually being kind of split apart because the way we've structured our society, we view, or at least our educational framework, we view the hard STEM, the hard sciences, as away from the arts, sociology, and the other more intangible things. Even though when you have a good meld of both, you actually get, the best results. For example, even in the arts, Pixar, right? The idea of digital technologies and digital rendering becoming a new animation front, right?
Mhm.
So for me, it was it wasn't until it wasn't until I used to watch this tech channel. It was you mainly for video games. We didn't have the consoles growing up as a kid, so just watching other people play video games or review them, I was very enthralled in that. So there was a channel growing up. I grew up in the countryside, Guelph, Ontario. There's a channel called G4 Tech TV. And then there was this old program called The Lab with Leo. And actually, I remember being like 10 or 11, and they had somebody come in talking about how they were using machine learning, how they were actually using AI to make a robot that was a quadruped. That means a robot with four limbs, four legs. They took away one of the limbs. They took away from one of the legs, so it was a tripod,
Mhm.
and the machine model was simulating how to stand up again, simulating how to walk, simulating how to regain function. And at the time, I'm probably 10, 11, maybe younger, and they're talking about machines thinking for themselves. And I'm blown away. I'm instantly just enthralled by that idea because I'm extrapolating if this is what they're able to do now when I'm this young, what happens when I'm an adult? Like, do we get flying wings? Like, is that possible? Like, I'm a kid with like a ma wild imagination, but I do see technology as the medium to achieve that.
Mhm.
So Touch Designer it is a programming environment, but it's a programming environment created for artists. You will see it in installation work, you'll see it in set design, you'll see it basically in anything AV related necessarily or digital rendering. Now it's getting into motion capture and gesture, and it's a configurable programming language that it works kind of like Lego. Uh,
Mhm.
so when I found the language that allowed my creativity to flourish, I went headfirst into that and delved deep into learning it, building things with it, creating wearable tech with it, creating other programs, things that you saw in the video. Yeah, and it's just always been a part of myself. But now that I'm in a field where there is a name for it, creative technologist, I no longer have to separate those two things. I can meld them together and be this more authentic version of myself and my disciplines, and it's helped me thus far.
That is, that sounds really cool, honestly, listening to everything that you just said. And then there's another side to what you do as well, fashion and youth. How does that merge into the work that you do? Or is
Yep.
it separate, would you say?
I would meld them all together because with me, it's never been actually that fashion show on the streetcar is what got me into the house program. And
Hmm.
I had to tell Lamar, the creator of House, I had to tell him like, I know that you guys had a cohort that was supposed to be a fashion based. You were looking for designers, but I'm not a design guy. I'm a design guy, but I'm not a fashion guy. I really don't really have that kind of Virgil Abloh, kind of obsession for it. But where I can come in is understanding wearable technology. I can bridge that kind of deep interest in technology and deep desire to incorporate it within my personal life or within society as a whole or within structures of stories that I want to create,
Hmm.
bridge them that way. So the fashion show on a streetcar was to address the fact that uh, melanated people often don't get the callbacks at the casting call. People that are shorts don't get the callbacks at the casting call. People that don't have that prototypical, designer look and model look can now have these avenues to explore these mediums. But also on the other hand, I'm designing a helmet with a display embedded that was designed for wildland firefighters. There was a map that I was showing of like different positions in the East Coast, in British Columbia and Alberta, and that's what that was. It's a interface that works within Touch Designer, but it was designed as a interface and kind of like a heads-up display for wildland firefighters to use in real time. And there's some issues with the way that we have grants funding for technologists that want to do certain things. But and that's I can go into that in a different conversation, but it's really about trying to incorporate the technological need or the technological solution with the aspect of myself that is also design inclined. By going through the house program, I am now more fashion forward and fashion minded, or at least design minded when it comes to apparel. So one of the things I also wanted to design initially was a way for uh, a way for people to feel safe within a social setting. And that stems from a conversation that I had with a friend of mine who came up to me at a club that we were all at a gathering. And she just says, and I've known this friend for some while, she's quite shorter than me. And she just says, can you just stay here? Like, can you just like stay here? And I'm looking at her and I'm confused as to what's going on. Like, hey Shay, like what's good? And she's like, there's a guy that is bothering me and I need them to like no go away. Can you just be like still and I can talk to you, but like hopefully they'll get the hint. And in my mind, I like my heart sank, because I have sisters, I have friends that are women, and I'm thinking to myself, what if I wasn't there? Is there a way that I incorporate some sort of safety technology or an abduction prevention technology
Mm,
within she's wearing that could act as the similar, in a similar framework. So
mm,
that started my wearable tech journey. I haven't figured it out yet, but it's still something that is truly on my mind when it comes to how we can use technology to address and wearables and fashion to address these problems. The fashion show was an inclusion problem. The heads-up display was a literal combat, wildland combat arts problem. And this other idea is more of a, protection mechanism that could be embedded within clothing. So I like to view things kind of similar in that lens, where it may not be a textile or a symbol or things of that nature, but it can actually serve the function. I do feel that symbols are important though, because we now, as a creative technologist, I create these technologies. I now have the influence on what they're named and what they look like. We use Bluetooth all the time. That comes from a ancient Celtic symbol. It's a rune. It's actually a rune symbol that you click on when you type in to enable Bluetooth. And without us knowing it, we're now engaging with somebody else's histories, just by this new technology. So I kind of like how technologists are able to do that. And I'm aiming to do that similar to uh, what Peter presented with the Adinkra symbols, like, include concepts of communication, concepts of nonlinear time, concepts like that, but including the symbology of such within the technology that I build.
mm. Thank you.
Oh.
And for you, Emmanuel, I am curious as to your worldview because you work with landscapes in different ways, whether it's painting or collaging. And the way, like the images that you've shown us, right? The collage, there's the water, there's the tree, there is the bird. Is it your way of bringing the garden into a space that is accessible to the visitors, or is it something that you've always envisioned of how, bringing gardens into the gallery space? I'm just curious to learn more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd return to something I think Peter said earlier, this notion of escapism and jazz and creation as this sort of, or creativity as this vehicle for um, like positing something else. I would say that the idea of the garden and the landscape, um, for me, it really emerged in 2020 and sort of was solidified. I was around it and didn't really understand what it was that was drawing me to it. And then in 2020, um, that summer, I spent a lot of time in nature. And then when I returned to the studio, I was reflecting on that experience and thinking about what it was for my body to, yeah, what it did for my body to be in the natural world, where all of a sudden I'm outside of just the cerebral, just my head, and into my body. And I'm not thinking about what's happening in the news. I'm not thinking about there isn't rather, there is an alleviation of the real anxieties.
Mm-hmm.
And that alleviation then creates a space or a little window that something else might happen. And so then the sort of project became, okay, first and foremost, how do I extend that possibility for myself? Right? How do I bring the garden into the studio? How do I transform the studio into the garden? How do I transform the work to function as a garden? And thus, how do I transform the spaces in which the work exists into the garden space so that I am extending that experience for myself and thereby extending that window of possibility to imagine something else? And then also, like, if you know, if there's anybody in your life who gardens or has a garden, one of the central things is the possibility of invitation, to
Mm-hmm.
be able to invite someone else into that space and to share that experience, which then becomes this notion of reciprocity, where the garden functions as a space of care and then offers the possibility for us to exist in the space of care. And then the creation of the garden is an act of, like, there is this sort of reciprocity that can be extended. Um, and so it really is two ways. It's sort of trying to extend it for myself and then also trying to or trying to create the possibility that there can be an invitation extended to my community as well.
Mm-hmm. I am the gardener at my home.
Yeah.
So I understand what you mean,
Yeah.
that reciprocity that exists between myself and the earth, being able to grow something from seed onto its growth and then seeing it return back to the earth one way or
Yeah.
another.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
You
it's
nourish it, it nourishes you. You nourish others, they nourish you. Yeah.
yeah, there's that strong connection in all of that. So I get what you're saying. I
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah.
Um, And then I will ask you all the question of how does your chosen medium, whether it's collaging, painting, technology, social economy, dance, how does that come into the way you shape history or social economy in the current works or in the past works or upcoming works that you want to speak to or speak about?
I guess okay, I guess my speaker's up, so I'll jump in and say, um, I think something that I think about that I think is crucial in my work, but as from hearing Peter talk and hearing Kwasi talk, um, a thread that I see is this notion of improvisation, um, that actually becomes this vehicle. If we think about the future, like I'm thinking of a Frederick Jameson quote that says it's not possible to imagine the future without using images from the past. um,
Mm.
and so there is this there can feel or it, there can be this sort of um, sense of being stuck. Like, if we have to imagine a future that is based on uh, images of the past and the present, and especially thinking in a context of blackness and the history that's there. Um, I think oftentimes there can be an emphasis on a sort of being stuck in positions of inequality or positions of trauma, or positions of tragedy, like all of that sort of negative. Um, and it takes, I think, really dynamic and playful and like nimble strategies of improvisation to create a scenario where the expected doesn't make sense anymore. And so then that sets up a possibility where something can emerge. Um, so that's one thing that I think about. Like if I think about the process of with collage, it's sort of like you rip things up and then you try to combine them and they don't fit. But then you kind of have to start moving things around in a way that is unexpected. And then you end up with an image that once it resolves, it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But you could not have it could not have been created without the ripping up and the desire to reconstitute. Same thing with painting, like the process of painting is a process of improvising. You put a mark down, you step back, and you're like, what is it doing? You don't know what it's doing.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something around this notion of improvisation, I would say.
Thank you, Emmanuel.
Um, could you just like distill that, like what the question is? So I have my answer, but I want to make sure that it's
Yeah,
answered.
sure. So how does your chosen medium, whether it's technology, art, fashion, shape the way you explore history, or social economy in your works, whether it's past or current works or upcoming works?
Okay. So for me, I think as a creative technologist, we're always dealing with, and as a technologist in general, it comes down to, even in art, it comes down to limitations. Technology has always been a part of history, and in terms of where we actually create like historical epochs and ages, when you think of the idea of the Bronze Age, you think of Stone Age, that's defined by the materials that we were using to actually build our societies. So we're in the digital age, we're going towards, AI assisted age, and we're going in towards the space age. So, we are when we are uh, ideating about the future, we are using the materials or using words about the materials that we have incorporated, that humanity has incorporated and adopted to build our societies moving forward. It's if you're going to be a technologist or if you're going to create technology, there are certain conversations that need to be had about the technological mediums that you use, even down to the interstate, how the military actually has funded and produced some of the biggest technological advancements in history, internet, again, the interstate as a weapons transport medium, things of that nature. You have to start seeing the big picture as to and seeing the big picture as to the effect of very small, very microcosmic conversations, inventions, initial prototypes that couldn't have worked with energy sources of the past, but can now work now. I also want to leave off with this idea that, in a sense of nonlinear time, that nothing that we do in technology today is actually new. And I feel that there's a technological gradient that is pushing us towards genuine sorcery, like medieval sorcery, whether it's the ability to conjure up things from thin air, conjure up the mastery of elements, the ability to talk to each other's minds. These were concepts from way thousands, of years ago. These were powers. These were spiritual gifts that, were spoken of or reflected on. But now we have the technological gradient to potentially achieve them and then move past it. So I was actually just viewing, as a way of research, I would go and look at consumer electronic shows from the past. So I was just in the 1980s looking at CES and the things that they were talking about, the technology that they were, going crazy over, VHS and things of that. And then taking that overlay and applying it to now in terms of our limitations, looking at the technological limitations that they had in the past, whether it's fidelity, adaptation, or or new mediums, and applying that to today to view how our technological exploration is actually going to be the foundation for a greater conversation to come tomorrow, right? So if we do live in a world where there is more wearable tech, or you have maybe a couple pieces of tech-based clothing, and you only need to basically just have enough for the week or until your next laundry day, that
Mhm.
in the context of like, what if, whatever you wore could turn into whatever you need? What does that do for the environment? What does that do for fast fashion? What does that do for the economies that, these fashion houses are built off of, and the throwaway economy, thrifting? It changes things, right? But that is a limit. That is a technological limit that we don't necessarily have yet. We're on our way, and maybe it's not going to be adopted, but it's a fun thing to play around in. And then when you play around in that, that's how you get the iPhone. The iPhone came from tricorder in Star Trek, right? So it's this ability that sci-fi will eventually be achieved. Science fantasy will also be achieved via in the context of sorcery, but there's a technological path towards it, and none of the ideas that we have towards that can really push past those initial powers and spiritual gifts that we've talked about. Premonition, you're talking about AI tools predicting the future, the whole poly market, betting, the betting craze that's going on right now, right? We're very analytical, but we have these tools to now give us these sorcerer-esque powers, especially within technology. That's where I've noticed it the most. And then
Mhm.
does that impact the society, which impacts the new ideas, which impacts the art, which then impacts the actual technology, which will be created by the people experiencing the art of that new society.
Mm. Thank you, Kwasi.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if I could maybe just say, one of the things that I find myself always connected to is music. I'm Jamaican born, so I grew up. My first music was reggae music, like so. Just reggae music is in my bones all the time, every day. It's in my head, and so music and vibration is something that's very dear to me, and I think it shapes me in just my tone, temperament, and so on. And so the extension to jazz music is not that far of a leap. And so the idea of music, it packs a strong punch, it's an artist puts something together. There's a lot of ideas packed into it. And so that fascinates me. I think that, but my work is always responding to a larger economic system. Come to your question, Suzanne. We live in the conditions we live in. It's an economic system that asks us to behave a particular way as consumers, producers, and we consume. So we behave a particular way based on the supply and demand, socially constructed economic conditions that we're in. And I'm very acutely aware of that as an artist, as an educator. And so because I'm acutely aware of that, I'm always responding to that, responding to how to counterweight that, for example, how to counterweight that in the classroom, how to counterweight that in my life, in my orbit, the people around me, how I move through society. So I'm very acutely aware of those conditions, for example. And so as an educator, for example, one of my best friends has a jazz club here in Toronto. It's not well known. It's a bit underground. Cheap plug. It's called Context by Train in honor of John Coltrane, 254 Lansdowne Avenue. Um, but so what I've done, I've taken my students out of the classroom into the jazz club, and I've conducted the class in the jazz club where they are hearing horns and trumpets and seeing artwork on the wall. And again, it's alternative ways of teaching and learning, of
Mhm.
storytelling, and so on. And so that really interests me in terms of how I can shape education, how I can shape new ways of teaching and learning and immersive learning and so yeah so that's kind of where my head is at, and the tool, the card game, is an extension of that in the classroom, I think. And so yeah.
Thank you. Before I ask you all another question, I would like to let our audience online know that if they would like to drop any questions in the chat room on our YouTube channel, you're more than welcome to do so, as we will move into the Q&A with the online audience. So while we give the online audience a moment to drop their questions in the chat room, I wanted to ask all of you, Kwasi, you've already talked a little bit about how your creative side became more and more evident as you grew older, right? Coming from a household where it was like science-based, I could speak to my household too. It's science-based and finance-based. So I also wanted to know more about you, Peter, as well as you, Emmanuel, and Kwasi. You're more than welcome to also jump in as well. How were you all able to get in touch with your creative side? Was it through a moment in your youth or early 20s, or as a child, where there was that inspirational point or moment that you felt like, this is it. I really want to explore more about it. Because I can speak for myself, where my career trajectory wasn't in the arts at all. It was more in psychology. I was supposed to be a counselor, but didn't happen. Because I did find my love for the arts relatively later in my mid-20s. But I'm more curious to learn more about what you in the past, that moment, what was it like for you when you got more in touch with your creative side, and what made you come into the creative field? My question was a little bit all over the place, so I understand if you want me to rephrase that.
I could I could go in and talk about specifically. I was noticing that again, like the quote says, I was pushing the right buttons almost. It was just like whenever signs from the universe, like certain people are meant to do certain things, and when they call away from that, yeah, they can, maybe they might feel fulfilled, but I know that genuinely, whether it's a play that I was writing for school, a picture that I was creating, I was always doodling on, pieces of paper for tests and, quizzes. And then my teacher in grade 4, I think it was maybe 3, she gives me my first sketchbook because she's like, "Hey, I know you love to draw. Here it is. Draw away, like, but don't draw on my tests," type of thing. And that set me on a path to be more, visually inclined. And then in my high school, middle school days, I started to realize that it was a strange correlation between anything that I did creatively and the impact that it had on me as a person, but also the effect that it had on my friends. Whether it's creating playlists, I decked out my locker and stuff to make it. That was actually probably my first art installation, was a massive locker that had lights and a beta fish inside and sound system that was blasting Outcast, kind of like, a Disney-esque, like locker from a TV show, and I kind of wanted to create that in real life, and I did. It lasted for a week, but the idea of like you seeing the effect of the thing that you created and the joy that it brought other people, as well as the joy that it brought you, and the improvement in other people's lives as well. I noticed those correlations to the point where I was like, every time that I do this, something great happens not only to me, but to my friends and the people I care for. And when that happens consistently, it's kind of like I took it as a sign from the universe that like you need to be here. This is what you're meant to do, or you need to explore this further. So it's noticing the effect of your actual creativity for me, and kind of like being an analytical mind as to what was happening when I did create versus the outcome, and how much better my world and the world of the people I cared for became because of it.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing, Kwasi.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I can say a few words about my origins. As I'd mentioned before, grew up in Jamaica, so it's I grew up like in the country in the seaside, and I think I grew up. I was one of those person that was just always quiet and contemplating, and I still am like that. And I think when I came to North America, um, I look around and it was very difficult sometimes when you come to a new country and you're in your teens, you're trying to find yourself. So I was strapped with a lot of challenges, challenges trying to figure things out, Um, and I think the more I became contemplative, the more I become developed ways, creative ways of understanding the world, making sense of the world and discovering things. This idea of discovery is really, really important, I think, for me. And I think some of that I've taken on a lot of uh, uh, traits of just looking at how things exist in the world and try to make sense of it through education, through art, and so, for example, I choreographed a dance piece. My background is in contemporary modern dance. When I broke up with my girlfriend at the time, I choreographed a piece, and the piece was called Indigo Moon. And so the pictures that you saw earlier that I share is from that piece of choreography where like I still love the person and it was sitting with me. And so the choreography allowed me to express myself, express the feelings that I had. And so Indigo Moon was one way of capturing those emotions and turmoil that was going through. So I kind of quickly learned to, similar like Bob Marley, and say, if you have a problem, you just sit down and write a song, write a
Mm,
song. And so that vehicle of expression, that vehicle of transformational change, and a surrendering to what the moment is very important to me in that sense. Yeah.
thank you for sharing, Peter.
Yeah, I would say quite similarly to, I think mine really centered, my journey is really, I think it's centered around relationships. And I'm also a teacher now. And in many ways, I'm not surprised that I started teaching because my being an artist really is because of so many teachers in my life. And around the sort of junior high school age, I was simply put, a very difficult child for my parents. Um, but at the same time, I had a high school art teacher that was a um, very kind human being. And so I found myself always wanting to hang out with my high school art teacher, and he would always be like, "Don't just sit there, draw something." And, and at that stage, I didn't feel like um, it was something I was good at, but it just felt like a way to hang out. Um, and that was really my introduction. And then by the time it was time to think about what to study at the university, I I knew that this was something I enjoyed doing. I didn't necessarily know or feel good at it, but it felt like something I enjoyed doing. And then I had the really great privilege of having great teachers who sort of recognized like, hey, you like to make things, and um, they supported that. And then of course you're in school, you have friends, and all we would do was hang out in the studio. Um, and then it kind of felt like this continuation of like, don't just sit there, make something. Um, and yeah, that was how it started for me. It became this way of being with people that I enjoyed being with, um, existing in an environment where maybe I felt I had a bit of control or say in my life. And similarly to what Kwesi was saying, like to make something and have someone look at that and be like, "Ooh, can I keep that?" And you're like, "Oh, wait, something I did has value to you." Um, and that was really nice. I remember making uh, some drawings of my aunties, and I remember my one of my I made a painting that was I saw it recently because I was back home, and it's in my auntie's house, and the stretcher is like askew, and everything about this painting is quote unquote terrible. And I was, I think, 15, and one of my aunties said, "I want to buy that." Um, and I remember thinking, "What? Like, why would you want to, like, I'm not an artist." And she's like, "That's beautiful, and you made that, and I want to live with that, and so I want to buy it." And it's little things like that that sort of you start to realize that you enjoy it, and that um, you have a capacity to create experiences that other people enjoy. I think that was what really
Mhm.
propelled me to it, as well as enjoying the people who were also in the process of making.
Very true. It's always the people in our lives, whether it's a teacher, a friend, a parent, or someone that we've been in a relationship with, that show us a side of us or help us discover a side of us that may or may not been, aware of. Because I can speak from my experience that I didn't visit a museum or an art gallery until I was 18. And my first time ever, it was through a school trip at the ROM. And that's where I was like, oh, I like this. I like this. And but then it was more about feasibility, stability for the future, which is why I chose psychology, right? But it wasn't until later on down the road where I was like, maybe I should consider going into the arts. I'm not a creative. I don't draw, I don't design, I don't, but I enjoy seeing the works of others, and being able to support them in their journey, whatever that looks like for them, and just being there in any way that I can. Um, so we do have a couple of questions in the chat room. I will read them out at the same time. I will drop it in our chat room here, just so you can all see it just as well. I think that was me. The first question, it is from, so it's Kia. This is a question to you, Emmanuel, specifically. They say, I loved hearing that quote from the Book of Delights by Ross Gay. I noticed it was a book of essays. What was the chapter backslash title of the essay?
Yeah, so the section I read was the introduction where he sets out, he explains why he's doing this in the first place. Um, Great book. There's also a book of more delights if you're interested.
Awesome. And I responded to it's Kayla as well. The second question that we have in our group chat room is Bushra Juaid. I hope I pronounced that correctly. 7014. I'm not sure to who this is addressed to, but what was the quote by Hilton Ailes about plans and borders? I'm not sure if it's to you, Peter, or to you, Emmanuel, but I will drop the question in our chat room.
It was me. I started off my presentation with it. It's from an essay called The Garden that's in the Paris Review, published in 2021. Um, uh, Busher, do you want me to read out the quote again or share it somehow?
I can share it on the chat room if
Okay.
you want to drop it.
Okay, I will. Yeah.
Okay. And then the next question that we have here, it's Kayla. This is addressed directly to Kwasi. Really interesting and inspiring talk. I think you mentioned you facilitate touch designer workshops or support them. Do you have any events coming up?
I currently don't have an event coming up other than maybe a potential workshop in Guelph, Ontario, where I'll be teaching touch designer and other creative marketing tools under EdVideo, EDVIDEO. EdVideo has been in my creative journey since the beginning in terms of post-secondary, and I'm trying to conduct more workshops with them as time goes on. But in terms of potentially, finding me, you can maybe get in touch with me and I can send you some resources if need be. But also, wherever institutions that you may know of that are looking for workshops, whether that be Ed Video or Interaccess, similar, or OCAD, something similar to that with Onsite. There might be ways to facilitate that. But currently, I think there's nothing set in stone, but maybe around September. But I am looking to do more workshops in the future. Hopefully, I'll get a call for something in the summer, and I can relay that information to Susan.
And I will relay that information some way, somehow. So it's Kayla. You're more than welcome to send us an email at Onsite Gallery at ocadu.ca if you would like to get more information about Kwasi's future workshops at Guelph you've mentioned, right? I was just busy typing in, sending the information back and forth.
Yes.
Okay.
Guelph and Toronto, actually.
Guelph and Toronto. Our next question, I think it might be addressed to you, Peter. It is from Thanos Wings. They ask, isn't there a danger in taking a class out of the classroom because the university will see that they can get away with not having to provide space for learning? Did the university pay your rent?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, thanks for asking. It's not something I do on a regular basis. That's the first thing. So it's almost like a one-off, if that. So that's the first thing, and it's usually a collaborative situation. I usually get permission from my department so that people are aware of what it is. I also check the age group, the age of all the students, so that I'm not taking someone to sit in front of a venue where there's alcohol and all of that stuff. So all of the due diligence is are done in place to make sure that students are safe and in that regard. I think it's again, I would just say that it's looking at how our education system is structured and looking at ways of learning, alternative ways of teaching and learning, the impact that those students experience with regards to music, for example. It was second to none in terms of them leaving that venue and feeling that they've learned something new. They might not be able to explain it, but they've learned something new in terms of the way they've experienced the ideas in the music, the vibe from the musicians who are experienced musicians. And so I think that there's a lot more positive than negative in that regard.
Thank you, Peter. I guess that also touches what you've just said, also responds to Thanos's next statement. So we can leave it at that. Now, the last question to you all is that we are excited to hear what's next for each of you. Could you give us a glimpse into your upcoming creative research technologist projects? If you want to give us a tidbit.
Sure, I will just say I won't talk about the actual projects themselves, but within programming, within coding, within the tech world, we're going through a radical shift similar to, I guess, the personal computer with these AIs. And I would actually extend that upon people that do not think that they are in the coding world. Because my talk was talking about how we are affected by technology, but we often don't feel like we can influence it. Now, it's not necessarily about how technical you are or how your technical gifts in terms of building technology and actually creating it. It's about how creative you are. So the programmers of the future were the ones that are so programmers of the past that were the greats were the ones that were highly specialized and had a lot of technical skill attached to them. 100% very important. I'm not trying to get rid of that broad statement, completely. Don't come for me, people in my community. But I will say the programmers of the future are the ones that are now realizing that it's not necessarily about how I can build something, but what am I trying to build? So creativity is now being rewarded, and it always was, but it's now being rewarded more so because their barrier to entry when it comes to code is lowered. So I'm looking forward to actually potentially empowering um, more of the diaspora's inventions, more of the diaspora, more businesses of the diaspora, and more businesses on the continent itself, and connecting those two using these AIs and using AI tools. So I think that radical shift is where we have to pay attention to in terms of as technologists, and really harness and also make sure that we are guiding that in the right path and providing examples of equitable, distributions of these technologies so that we're not being plagued by, systems that are going to leave us in the dust essentially and have us picking up the pieces. So I would say looking at how AI and your creativity can impact the the technological world with the advent of assistive AI and intelligence.
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I could just say currently I'm working with a research lab here at OCAD University that is called SLab, it's a Strategic Innovation Lab. And it's been around for a while. The lab has been around for a while, and but we're sort of revamping the lab for uh, SLab 2.0, if you will. And a big part of the this particular research lab is actually looking at social systems. In in our world today, we live in systems, in health system, transportation system, education systems, economic systems. And so a lot of the times these systems are underpinned by the values that we carry around, the way that the values and the policies we have. And so SLab, part of the mandate of SLab is to look at how we can not just theorize about systems, but actually look at ways to make systems more real, to go back to organic system, natural systems. So for example, you know, in my intro bio, I mentioned walk and talk and tea, and to take the classroom outside into the natural world, and rather than having theorize and stuff in the classroom, take it outside into the natural world, walk and talk, and look at the way the natural systems, the natural world can inform us, can give us the knowledge that we sometimes forget. The land gives us knowledge, the water gives us knowledge, the biosphere gives us knowledge. And so tapping back into those natural ways of healing and being and knowing and discovering is another way to recalibrate our value systems and our economic systems and our as well as our education systems. So that's where I'm heading next with my project. Yeah.
Thank you, Peter. Sounds exciting.
I'm very excited that it is looking like spring, and so
Mm.
I'm very excited to plant my garden. Um, and then also working towards an exhibition of new paintings at Nicholas Mativier Gallery in October. So looking forward to gardening and painting.
That is, yeah, me too. I am definitely looking towards gardening as well. Awesome. Well, thank you all to our wonderful panelists, Emmanuel, Peter, and Kwasi, for joining today's conversation. Thank you to Shelby and to Christina for interpreting today's panel. The last bit that I would love to do is talk a little bit about Onsite Gallery and what we do here. So currently on display is the Becoming in the Light of the Miracle. It is an exhibition that's curated by Farah Yusuf, and it features many artists across Canada as well as international. The other exhibition that we currently do have on is Metabolic Loop, the Delaney Family Emerging Curators Prize, where its upcoming public programming, it is scheduled for Friday, April 10th. Yeah, April, yes, we are going into April. Friday, April 10th, with the guest curators, Gas Collective, Steffi, and Gizam. And then the following day, on the Saturday, April 11th, we have artist curator conversation with the Metabolic Loop artists Maria Simmons and Alyssa Elikpella with Gas Collective. If you are in town, feel free to drop by at 199 Richmond Street West. That is where we are located at. Otherwise, you're more than welcome to check out our website for the exhibition information, as well as the artist curator interviews that we have conducted for both of the exhibitions are available on our YouTube channel. Once again, thank you all. Have a great weekend ahead, and I hope y'all enjoy your upcoming springs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye now.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much. Bye.